Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so kindly for joining us. Welcome to Green Apple Books on the Park. My name is Car Johnson. I'm the event coordinator for Green Apple, and tonight I am very glad to welcome Dennis McNally as we celebrate. That's exactly right. Cheers for Dennis. I'm going to give you a lot of opportunities to clap this evening, so I'm really glad that you're at the ready and ready to go with your enthusiasm. We are celebrating Dennis's book, The Last Great Dream, How Bohemians Became Hippies and Created the Sixties. Let's give a hand for The Last Great Dream. He is joined tonight by none other than Joel Selvin. Let's give Joel a hand, too. Thank you, Joel. I have very brief business before we get to the heart of the evening. Now is a good time to silence your cell phones if you have not already. Picture taking, I have been told, is fine, encouraged even. Just, you're not allowed to take bad pictures of our authors. That's the only thing we ask. Good photos only. But I mention all of this to say, please don't take a call in the middle of the event while you're sitting in the audience. And if you need to, you can step outside. Thank you so much. Please do check out our full event calendar online at greenapplebooks.com. We have a really great season ahead of us, including the event you are currently attending. Please do buy books if you have not already. We encourage it. We have books by both of our authors available this evening, and I'm going to assume that they would be happy to sign them at the end of the night. They'd be happy to sign them. You can get signed copies here. If you've been here before, you've certainly heard me say that when you buy books from us, not only do you support us as an independent bookstore, you support the writers who put so much work into making these books, and then you get to have a book, which might be the best part. So if you are able, we always appreciate it. Thank you so kindly. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce the two writers who are joining us tonight. First, Joel Selvin is a San Francisco-based music critic and author known for his weekly column in the San Francisco Chronicle, which ran from 1972 to 2009. Selvin has written more than 20 books covering various aspects of pop music, including the number one New York Times bestseller, Red, My Uncensored Life in Rock with Sammy Hagar. His most recent books are Sly and the Family Stone, An Oral History, and Hollywood Eden, Electric Guitars, Fast Cars, and The Myth of the California Paradise. Please give one more hand for Joel Selvin. And last but most certainly not least, Dennis McNally is an author, historian, and music publicist. His books include On Highway 61, Music, Race, and the Evolution of Cultural Freedom, A Long Strange Trip, The Inside History of the Grateful Dead, and Desolate Angel, Jack Kerouac, The Beat Generation, and America. Tonight we are celebrating his latest book, The Last Great Dream. Let's give one more hand for Jack McNally.
Just let me see how it sounds without a microphone back there. What do you think of the end of the hall there?
Not too good.
Not too good, okay.
Yeah, they need it.
All right. So, as the lady said, I'm Joel Selvin. Thank you. Look at all these people, Benny. I am really glad to be here. You know, the writer life, whatever that is, what we do alone. It's not something that you do with other people. Oh, there are collaborations, but generally speaking, those are handoffs. They don't happen in the same room at the same time. But really, you know, when you're a writer, you're by yourself and you're on your own. That doesn't mean you don't know the other writers. You do. You get to know who they are, and everything from collaboration to competition, from pride to envy, everything. So I've been around this town quite a while, and I've come to know an awful lot of the other writers. But I'm here tonight to kick off this program with Dennis's new book, and I want to say that this is my deepest, most esteemed colleague. I love Dennis beyond all others.
Yeah, I gotta say, he knows some really good writers. I haven't heard him say that before, by the way, honest. And no bribe involved.
You know, it's so interesting to me, this book, and we'll get into it. There's really 4 Dennis McNally books. There's a 5th if you count the Garcia interview collection that he edited. and we want to mention that in case there's any deadheads here that would be aware that the audio book is Jerry speaking to you. Apparently the publisher forgot to market that aspect of it. But the 4 books, I mean, we have the Kerouac biography, we have the blues book, the Highway 61 book, I suppose more accurate, the Dead biography, and now this. I mean, these things are of a piece, aren't they, Dennis?
Yes. When I went to the acknowledgments, I said, you know, I hadn't realized it, certainly in advance, and even when I was like finishing, I was going, you know, this is a quartet. They all fit together. I didn't consciously appoint myself as the historian of the counterculture. It just happened. But when you'll see if you buy the book, hint, 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 in the back there's acknowledgments, and I put in acknowledgments to all 4 books because really they're connected, and the people who helped me with one are probably still helping me. Certainly Joel. Well, some of you may not know, or most of you may not know, but Joel probably has the best private library of music, leaving aside music as in albums and CDs and whatnot, but books I've ever seen, and kindly, you know, most people can't get him to say yes about lending books because, you know, they don't come back. But I escaped mostly because I'd open my veins if I stole a book from somebody. It was just that's the ultimate sin. Anyway, so he lent me a lot of books, and I do want to add one comment about Joel. So I got to San Francisco. I was really new, didn't know, you know, hardly knew anyone, and there was this guy Paul Grushkin.
Paul Grushkin introduced us, yeah.
And what was amusing, which I always thought was just hilarious, was that I guess we were going to go see Jerry Garcia at the Broadway version of The Stone. I guess it was called The Stone. And we stopped in Vanessi's for whatever reason, and Joel was sitting at the counter eating raw meat. And I always thought that was beef tartare. And I always thought that was symbolically, you know, here's the critic chomping down on the raw meat. And, you know, little did I know that, you know, that was the start of, that's at least 45 years now, well, and now we live not so far from each other and so forth and so on. So.
Well, I just want to go back to this book, the Dream book, because I know your story is that you did the photo exhibit for the 50th anniversary of the Historical Society, and it occurred to you, my gosh, you know, I can't believe you didn't think of this book before.
I'm not being disingenuous. What happened was, I was quite disappointed. I did a book it's called On Highway 61, and it was with a small press, a very distinguished small press. And it had a wonderful editor, Charlie, superb editor. And his daughter found, among other things, found the cover, which is a great cover. And so I was really happy with that. Unfortunately, they hired a rookie. I think I was her first book. Get an old publicist. You know? You just don't want a baby publicist. Anyway, so it did not come off well, and a couple of projects.
He says that all the time. You know, the thing won the Deems Taylor Award, and I was up against it.
and it won it because he had managed to convince Charlie to submit these things to the Deems Taylor Award. Is that ASCAP gives away awards for books, and it's the only award I ever got.
I didn't tell Charlie to put your book on.
No, you just got him to start it. But at any rate, that part went well. There were business failures with things I was doing with the Jerry Garcia estate. I put together a box set of what Garcia did before the Grateful Dead, which was acoustic and bluegrass music and stuff, and it was really good, except that they did such genius things as place the most important piece of PR on it 1 year before the book came out. And that sort of annoyed me, shall we say. So anyway, I was like ready to, not worry about writing yet another book. Let's just leave it at that. I hadn't quit, but I didn't. And then, true, I started looking at it, they said, well, 50th anniversary, every, the De Young and the Berkeley and every museum was.
We all got a little workout.
Yeah, we all made some. all of us so-called experts were like, okay, so I consciously started with the Beats. To talk about the Summer of Love, you talk about among other things, you talk about the Human Being, January 1967, which began with beat poets and then went on to rock and roll. The connection's fairly obvious. And I started with I went, all right, we'll start with when Allen Ginsberg read Howl for the first time. And I don't know, a month in, it wasn't immediate. I'm not so bright necessarily. But anyway, I suddenly went, oh, where did it start? And all the book, and the single sort of most confusing and surprising thing to me about all of this study, and God knows there have been enough books about hippies and Summer of Love and this and that, but nobody went very far back. They tend to start, frankly, in June of 1965, when the first time they combined rock and roll, a light show, LSD, and hippies at a place called the Red Dog Saloon in Silver City,
That's where my book starts.
Yeah, exactly. And lots of others too. So all that was all good, and I just went, and being the historian, I suddenly went, okay, where did this come from? And I might add that and I think Joel will probably agree with me. Research is fun. You're just poking around. You're learning things. You get surprised. And I had a couple of wonderful surprises in the course of all this, and I'll mention them later. But so I'm just poking along, and finally decide that really obviously you have to work into beats. There's a guy named who did a book, and right now I'm forgetting his name, Josh. The guy who did the book on Abby Hoffman, Raskin, Jonah Raskin, and Jonah's pissed at me because he loved the book, gave me a wonderful review, but the cover says, from Bohemian to hippie. And he says, what about the Beats? I said, that's in the middle. There's only so many words you can put in a subtitle. There's the beginning and the end, and then couldn't convince him on that one. But at any rate, and then when I got to, but as people who study this will tell you, it's very important that Alan read Howell for the first time in San Francisco. Important because that's where he wrote it, and there was a very snotty historian who said, yeah, but it's all about New Yorkers. And it's true, all the names and things that he brings up. The point being, and I said, well, he missed the point, since the point is, yeah, it's about New Yorkers, but Alan couldn't have written it until he got to San Francisco and experienced certain things, and have the audience that he had that night at the Six Gallery. So anyway, that was all well and good. I went back before the Beats and realized that the scene that had been set up in San Francisco, do a 1-minute history of all of San Francisco and just say this. Every other city in America is built for business reasons. San Francisco was created by a bunch of crazed losers who couldn't function on the East Coast or in Chile, or in China, Canton, and decided to gamble with their lives and see if they could, make money on gold. And it left a quality, mostly of tolerance for the craziness. The example being, of course, Emperor Norton. Any other city in America where you always have street crazies. But when Emperor Norton decided to print his own money, and the bartenders accepted it, you knew San Francisco was different. And so,
you know what it is, Dennis, is the final resting place of 5,000 years of Western civilization moving west from the Mesopotamia, and it arrives in California in 1849. Hello,
and
end of history.
Right, no, there's a quote from Duncan about the western edge of things that San Francisco is, and we look towards Asia, not, frankly, I don't look back towards Wichita. So anyway. You have this different city, and so where am I going to start? And I finally, the first place that made sense was Kenneth Rexroth and Robert Duncan. And I might add, it's a fascinating pair of guys, because Rexroth was at least intermittently homophobic, and Robert Duncan was a very early and very out gay person, and that they basically got along, and that their different tastes. Rexroth was formerly an anarchist, small a, not bombs ideas, and Duncan was a whack job Rosicrucian, Atlantis theory, all that. He grew up in Alameda in a household that was a matriarchy. That what did she loved. She loved Jesus, Lao Tzu, and Azoth, the magazine of occult. That was what he grew up with, and stuck with it the rest of his life. Anyway, they created an anarchist, flipped out poetry scene, gathered in other people, and then simultaneously, what we now think of, at least, and it will come back. I have total faith in Mrs. Jobs, that the San Francisco Art Institute will, in some fashion, be reborn. But in the late 40s, it was a powerhouse of, frankly, of almost all vets. But not all veterans just buy homes and start making babies. Some of the vets went to art school, and they were really. Not enthusiastic isn't enough of the right word. They were just galvanized students. It's one of the reasons why the president kept the studios open all night, because you want to paint at 5? Go ahead. So those two things generated this not movement, but this pattern of people questioning the conventional American values, and then the New Yorkers arrived, like Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and he opens he takes it from Peter Martin and creates City Lights, which is the clubhouse and the center of everything. And some veterans from the Black Mountain, and those of you who don't know, Black Mountain was this fantastic, unusual college in North Carolina, with half of the ex-faculty of Harvard would pass through. It was an amazing place. And veterans of it, including our very own Ruth Asawa, and if you haven't gone down to MoMA, do so. MoMA. Do so, because I just love her art. And she had been there, and a student there. And the guy who was the bartender at the place, and the founders of the place, which was the Beat Bar, after Vesuvio's. At any rate, and there's this welcoming of this scene, so that North Beach becomes what we know, which still, in its weird way, still there's a taste there. It wasn't what it was like in '57, but
This is still a great neighborhood. Do you know about Thomas Carra?
No.
So Thomas Carra was a soldier in Europe in World War II who stumbled across how the Italians made coffee and just thought it was the greatest thing in the world. And so when he came back in 1945 at Columbus and Broadway, he opened Thomas Carra Coffee. And he was selling not coffee, not cups of coffee, he was selling espresso machines. He was the first person in this country to sell espresso machines.
Interesting. And
so that the coffee houses up Grand Avenue
right.
all bought their stuff from Thomas Carra, yeah.
And brought the whole concept of a coffee house culture to San Francisco, which was, of course, is really, in addition to the bars, was really essential to the whole beat scene. I might add that the same thing happened in the early 50s in England, in London. You know, we all think of them as tea drinkers, and they were. But in the mid-late 40s, and I forget the guy's name now, but Italy's economy was a shambles. And so he started selling coffee, the machines, and they didn't do well as a machine. So he opened the first coffee shop, in London, in about 55. And
Two Eyes.
The Two Eyes.
Yeah.
And
that's
then,
where British rock and roll came from.
And then the coffee shops, and there were by now 10 all over Soho, the beat neighborhood of London.
There's a movie
called
Lawrence Harvey. It's called Espresso Bongo, and it's set in the Two Eyes.
How did I miss that? But yeah, and so the whole skiffle, which was what we Americans tended to call jug band music, but it's sort of a rudimentary roots American blues music, Lead Belly and so forth. But the thing about skiffle was you didn't need real instruments. They played what they called a T-chest bass, which is one string, and that's what John Lennon and Paul McCartney started with the Quarrymen, was a skiffle band. And skiffle took over the coffee shops and brought another sort of divergent strand. You know, England was a tougher nut to crack than America when you think about the class structure and so forth and so on.
And the war.
And the aftermath of the war, you know, things, I mean, everything was still being rationed. And you couldn't get sugar in England. It was still rationed well into the 50s. So anyway, when I started writing this book, and I was mostly focused on San Francisco, because the most important stuff started here and then flowed out. But my very smart agent said, if you only write it about San Francisco, it'll only sell in San Francisco. So kindly widen your sights. So I added LA, where you have a lot of particularly arts, and then of course the fact that Aldous Huxley wrote The Doors of Perception there. Gee, that was convenient. And New York, which of course the Village has been the home of free thinking in America since Walt Whitman, anyway. And then London. And by then I realized, and it's all going to come together in music with bands, for psychedelic bands, all psychedelic bands that counted, from all those four cities at Monterey Pub. And there's let me read this to you, just very, very briefly. I was going to read a slightly longer chunk, but that's not necessary. The enduring image of Haight-Ashbury is of beautiful, beatifically high young people, flowers in their hair, listening to wonderful music while positively exuding peace and tranquility. For 4 days at Monterey, it was reality. And it colored the next decade and more of the youth culture. All the values that the avant-garde had represented, from the pacifism and mystic exploration of Rexroth and Duncan, the anti-racism, the joyful exploration of sensuality, all of it would attach to the label sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The label was perhaps reductionist, But the reality was far more complex and nuanced than has been commonly understood. And the punchline to this is there was conflict between the San Franciscans, who were very purist, and the fact that the people who were running the festival were from LA and they were suspect, music business, we don't trust them. Danny Rifkin was one of the managers of the Grateful Dead, and so things were so good that Rifkin, though a purist, almost digger about Adler and Phillips, who were the guys who were running it, called his friend Jay Fellon, one of the two owners of the psychedelic shop, and said, "You got to get down here." And it was true. I mean, something really magical happened in Monterey, and so it makes a very fitting conclusion to the book. And I'll add in. There's one verse after that I'll talk about later.
Okay. Do you remember the question?
Oh, what was it?
I asked you if you really didn't think of this.
Oh yeah. You're right, and no, I'm telling you the truth. It slowly, it just slowly dawned on me that I should look at the wider picture of. I mean, I'd done The Dead, and so I knew something about San Francisco.
Done Kerouac.
And I'd done Kerouac, who was also San Francisco. But what I had not studied is the wider impact of, hippie and where, how it went and where it went. And when that dawned on me, then it was like, oh, okay, this is another avenue. And, I went down that rabbit hole. One of many, I might add. Surrealism and, well, never mind. It's just, there's more stuff than you can shake a stick at.
Yes, it did spread out. It did spread out underneath it. I'm aware of that. I want you to know, Dennis knocked this thing out in 10 years.
Now, I had an excuse with the Grateful Dead book, which took 20. Namely, that I had a job at the time, and it was working for their publicist was kind of busy. But yeah, I don't go fast, so this, bit by bit, as I say, I had it one focus, and then my agent got me, to open it up, and when I started seeing the way everything fit together, whether it was, there were weird things. For instance, one of the really important institutions in that really amazing period, and if you read the book, you'll see why I call it that, between, say, 63 and 65, which is, in other words, there's a lot of cultural cross-pollination going on, but it hasn't gotten to rock and roll yet. Remember, 63, there's no Beatles yet, or all the folkies who had suddenly picked up electric guitars. And a group of people started the Tape Music Center, which was this bizarro electronic boing boing music that most people, it's hard for them. And I might add, we're talking about something very different from electronic dance music now. It had no beat. Almost ever. But what made it really influential was that they set up a place at 323 Divisadero, and the next time you go by there, it's corner Divisadero and Page, and it had been the California Labor College, which was a left-wing, only in San Francisco, sort of spin-off, I think, from the the shiploaders, where the longshoremen, a relation to them. And they brought in, not only, they had space, which they shared with KPFA, which of course was in Berkeley, but but they were interested in weird music, unusual electronic music, avant-garde. And they wanted a place, a site in San Francisco. And then on top of that, Anna Halprin, who, by the way, only became Anna later when she joined Subud. But her birth name was Anne. I had more people writing me saying, it's Anna. And I said, no, it wasn't. When I'm writing about in 1961, she was still Anne. But anyway, who was really a real revolutionary in the world of dance. And it's one of those classic things where the sum is way bigger than the parts. And you had people, among others, Phil Lesh of the Grateful Dead, George Hunter of the Charlatans, whose girlfriend was an Ann Halpern dancer, Lucy Lewis, and who was composing for her. She was also a choreographer, and he was composing for her by literally taking a razor blade to tape and throwing it up in the air, the scraps in the air, and then retaping it, and seeing what it sounded like. There was a lot of this creativity, and in that period, 63, 64, as you'll read, there's all these events which mix poets, weird musicians, painters, you name it. And the end result was at least one node of this story. And again, it was a complete surprise to me. There's this wonderful guy. He's slowly recovering from a massive injury, so he isn't here. He would have been here, I'm sure. His name is John Lyons. You ever run across John?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he's a collector of ephemera. Specifically, it started out as the free speech movement. So you'd get these like hand typed out, rally at Sproul today at 3 or whatever. And he has this, quite a fantastic collection. And it's grown more and more. So he shows me this benefit that takes place at the Mime Troupe. The Mime Troupe had now gone independent and was on Cap Street in San Francisco, and they had a benefit, probably not unlike many, for a guy who had gotten busted for pot, and it featured, among other things, Phil Lesh playing trumpet, mime troopers dancing around and doing weird things. It was just one of those. Bill Ham, who was later the lights guy at the Avalon, remarked it was whatever happened kind of thing, and this is all extremely improvised and weirdness just for the sake of weirdness. And I might add that Phil Lesh in his memoir says something to the effect of he had no idea what he was doing there. Were we there to épouter les bourgeois, or were we there for? And my comment was, well, what he was really there for, though we didn't know it at that moment. Remember, he was still playing trumpet. It's 63. Was he did have a knack for improvisational music, which his friend Jerry Garcia would drag him into a year and a half later. That's the kind of stuff that I got. And I'll tell you, and I'm going to tell one other research story, because it was just one of the best moments of my life. Because it all came as a complete surprise. Like I say, San Francisco, the mainstream culture bends. And it bends in bohemian ways, which is generally looser sexually, looser drug-wise, blah, blah, blah. And that's been going on for a long time. But it doesn't have to be that way. So anyway, I went to interview a man named Mel Weitzman. Now, Mel Weitzman, in 1951, was a student at the Art Institute of Clifford Stills. He was a Marine Corps veteran, working class guy, but drifted into boho land because. And he's an art student, and eventually he gets out of the Art Institute. He's playing trumpet and driving a cab. He's a beatnik. Fine. He also, in 1964, meets a man named Shunryu Suzuki, otherwise known as Suzuki Roshi, and becomes a very serious Buddhist. eventually becomes the abbot, the boss of San Francisco Zen Center after Suzuki Roshi died. And until his death a year ago, maybe, the Berkeley Zen Center. But what was great about the interview, which was enlightening, he gave me all kinds of details I had no idea, is when he remarked, completely apropos, when I was married to Ruth Weiss. Now, for those of you who don't know, and there's no great reason for you to know, she's not a well-known person, Ruth Weiss is a beat poet who looks like a beat poet. She dyed her hair green, she never used capitals, she was kind of out there. And he says this to me, my jaw drops, and I went, you were married to Ruth Weiss? And yeah, and he goes into all that. And that's sort of the kind of random good stuff that you find when you take 10 years to write a book.
Gotcha.
Let's see if you guys have any better luck. Back there in the back, I saw your hand go up.
Can you talk a little bit about the research you did, how you did it, how you conducted it?
Can you talk a little bit about the research and how you did? Can you talk a little bit about anything?
With great difficulty. Well, the research started at the San Francisco Public Library. God bless it and keep it for all of our lives and on. I was the publicist for the Grateful Dead, so I know all the Grateful Dead members who were living in the Haight. And through them I meet, other people, mostly in the music world. And so that's a lot of it. And then, just experiencing. I got to San Francisco in '74, and it was different then, as all of you may remember. The first block I drove in San Francisco, I was passenger, and I was looking around going, how much do apartments around here go for? I just instinctively knew this is where I was going to be. And I might add, they were a hell of a lot cheaper then. But no, the research, you sort of take a shotgun and you fire it and you see what it hits and what, if anything, makes any sense. And I just sort of went,
What were you digging into at the library?
Biographies of relevant people, the Rex Roth biography. The saddest story, I contacted Rex Roth's biographer, a woman named Magdalene, I think it's Magdalene, and asked her a really esoteric question about whether or not he was involved with the painting of the murals on Coit Tower. Actually, as a commie, he had organized a sort of an artists' commie group, and they ended up doing those murals. I don't think he actually painted them, but she couldn't tell me because, unfortunately, all of her notes and all of her work product had been in the basement of her home in southern Manhattan when Hurricane Sandy destroyed them.
Oh my God.
And I just sort of cried when she said that. But anyway, and so you read biographies and then you start reading bibliographies and and they send you in one direction and on and on and on and on.
Where did you start with your interviews?
Well, I cheated. You'll see in the book. I did cheat. I padded it with one name, which was Tom Wolfe, because I interviewed him in regard to Neil Cassidy for my I was working on the Kerouac book. This is like 1973, and he came up to you. It was extremely gracious to me, I might add. And he came up to UMass where I was and gave me half an hour away from the local press, and I got to ask him some got to talk to him. But then it was just, you run into somebody, can I talk to you? And most of the time they'd say, sure, I spent a lot of time with a guy who I don't see. I'm not surprised because he's very traditionally crotchety. His name is Tzvi Strzok, and he lives just down the hill from where the Grateful Dead were at 706. Ashbury, and he's suspicious of everything. And I'm waiting to get a nasty note from him about the book. And although I don't think he's going to complain about the facts because I quote him accurately. I know that much. But then it was just. I'd have to look at the list just to see where it came. But for instance, while I was doing this, I was at Zen Center and spent a lot of time with that man over there named Roger Hilliard, who is very much part of Zen Center, and who knows, this is a small town, who knows Joel, because he owned, and I think his family continues to own, a coffee shop called Farley's on Potrero Hill.
That's not a coffee shop.
Well,
That's a
it's
community center.
Yes. Well, that's the Zen approach to coffee, okay? You sit down, you talk, you drink some coffee. Roger, told me about, because Roger had lived with the two brothers who started the psychedelic shop, which is sort of the official opening, shall we say. It's not. I mean, there were things before it, but it's kind of the official opening of H Street as a hippie mecca. The Thelen brothers. I interviewed Jay, and went up to see him up in Grass Valley. Lovely man, gave me a great interview. Then I found out that, of course, Roger at the time was married to a very fine photographer back there with the glasses. Raise your hand, please. And her name is Susan Hilliard, still. Among other things, she I used one of the pictures. If you look at the photo book and you see the only bad thing about it is that it is black and white, because there are only black and white pictures in this book, which was true, which was not important for 90% of them because they were taken in the 50s and nobody shot color in the 50s. But as it happened, she took a lovely, very early 1966 picture of the members of the Grateful Dead playing at the Panhandle in color. And I had to say, I'm sorry, but we're going to have to bleach it. But anyway, that's one of the pictures in the book. And another great one of Ramon Sender at the Trips Festival. So, I meet Roger, I get to Susan. It goes, around and around. I work with the tall guy with the white goatee and the shaved head over there named Jim. And he's the only one I didn't meet back then, and I don't know why, because I've met everybody else in the music business by then. But anyway.
I was playing with Army men.
There you go. There you go. At any rate, that's just a side remark. So, there aren't any formal rules to research. There shouldn't be. Or I can't imagine what formal rules to research would be, except you just, you start at one edge and keep chewing and keep finding out things, and you meet, and then things just start coming to you. As I say, I mean, I knew about Mel. I had met Mel through Zen Center events, and I knew he'd been a beatnik, but only a little bit. And it finally dawned on me, thank God, not long before he passed, you really should go talk to Mel. So I did.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
One is, I really want to thank you for the Altamont book.
Are you welcome?
It's brilliant research.
Anyone who hasn't
Gang.
read that book and wants to learn more about rock and roll and some of its motivations should read that book.
Thank you.
So bravo. But I guess I want to ask about the title of this book, Dennis, because The Last Great Dream, I don't know if you mean it like, oh, well, that's the last one and there's another one coming, or if it's the last one. And it's, to me, it's really, right now, and I'll just use protests as an example. I go to a lot of protests.
Thank you.
And there are a lot
Thanks,
of gray-haired people there.
Yeah.
And everyone's saying, where are all the young people? And I have to believe the young people are off resisting in ways that I, as an old person, wouldn't understand or don't know.
Well, I certainly hope you're right.
But anyhow, so I really would like you to yak about the title a little bit.
Good question. Yeah.
It is a good question, although again, I'm not going to have all that satisfying an answer in that, the Desolate Angel, of course, is a take on his book Desolation Angels, and it occurred to me, and it was obvious. For a long, long time, I had a different title for the Grateful Dead book, but my father used to say, and if you have to explain a joke, it's a bad joke. If you have to explain a title, it's a bad title. And I realized that the title I had was it was good if you were a deadhead and knew all the lyrics and could get it. Bad idea. And then I one day just sort of sat there and said, so what's the most single famous 5 words that Robert Hunter ever wrote? How about What a Long Strange Trip It's Been? Well, that was easy. And then the other, On Highway 61, was kind of easy because the book ends with that song. For this, I don't know, halfway through no particular stimulation that I can think of, but I'm just thinking about it, that it was it was a dream. It was a dream of a better way to live. And it wasn't going to last in physical form for very long, although the ideas, I would argue, still do, in many ways.
I've got a whole theory about that, but why is it the last great dream?
That's what popped into my head. Because it was a great dream. Because it was the last great dream. Because how many we've got technology and this and that, but do we have any great dreams in our lives these days? Especially now, since January.
World peace, brotherhood of man.
Yeah, and none of that's not exactly hot on the fire these days. And so that's why it was the last time, certainly of our generation, where there was this collective and quite wonderful dream, and there it was. And then my editor, good guy, Ben, said, I forget what, something like I got academic, protect me from myself, and had a subtitle that was something along the lines of the origins of the counterculture or something, whatever. And he said, no, from the Bohemians to the Beats and how they made the 60s. And I thought, yes, bingo. As I said, the Beats are in the middle of that, but when you're doing a subtitle, you don't list everything. You only list the beginning and the end. At least that was my rap to Josh. Jonah. But anyway, so The Last Great Dream. And I'll do this just because it makes sense. It's not long. So I end the book after Jimi Hendrix, as you'd expect, who closed. Actually, he didn't. The Mamas and the Papas followed him, right?
Oh, he wasn't. He
Monterey
was
Pop.
way earlier.
Yeah, no.
There was lots of people between Jimi Hendrix and the Mamas and Papas.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. But at any rate, for music history and music memory, it was The Who, the pathetic Grateful Dead. I say pathetic because they didn't have a stage show. So there's The Who destroys the stage. Then the Grateful Dead, play some guitar. And then Jimi Hendrix goes bananas. Okay, so this is, and that's really the popular memory of he has the advantage because he worked on Jim Marshall's book, all those pictures Jim Marshall took at Monterey, which were phenomenal.
I love that. I worked on it. I wrote it, Dennis.
Okay. Well, you didn't take the pictures.
No, but I got him out of Marshall.
Yeah, no,
That was major.
Oh no, that was a major accomplishment, and it's a fascinating book. No, I lifted from it liberally. Remember, if you steal from one person, it's plagiarism. If you steal from everyone, you're a scholar. This is, but here's, let me, this is the last paragraph there's acknowledgments afterwards and acknowledgments and stuff, but this will tell you why I call it, it will kind of give you an idea of why I called it The Last Great Dream. Bob Weir and his friend Garrett Graham wrote a song called To Jinn, like the genies, DJINN. Working from the premise that a dream captured is already falsified, that only the act of dreaming is authentic. And I think they're right. And it is the story of the 60s, that it was a dream and it died as a dream. But the dreaming continues. So here's the last verse of that song. A short while back, the door flung wide. We all saw good luck on the other side. Door blew shut. But here's the deal. Dreams are lies. It's the dreaming that's real. Dreams are lies. It's the dreaming that's real. It's the dreaming that's real. And I wasn't reading it. I was very pleased. I was just listening to some tape of Rat Dog, his band, playing that song, and I suddenly went, bingo! And called up Garrett, who's a friend of mine. I said, "You're gonna have to let me do this," and he went, "Sure." You know, it was not a tough negotiation. So,
Well, that's fair use.
well, yeah, you say that. Song lyrics they get really hinty about, but at any rate, it was certainly not a problem to get Bob and Garrett to agree. They were rather, I think, flattered that I want to close my book with your lines. Okay.
Well, we're here to sell books. So if you don't have them, the folks here at Green Apple are ready to serve you. Dennis is on hand to inscribe personally your copy of The Last Great Dream. And that's what we came here for. So thank you so much for coming. There's so many of you. And Dennis, thank you. And thanks Green Apple.